Hi guys, Zyger here and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In today's tutorial I will show you how to create a leveling and reward system for your Unity game. We will integrate this with LootLocker, meaning all of the data will be stored on their website. The tutorial will cover things like inventories, levels, rewards and more, so let's get started. Okay, so the first step is you want to go to the LootLocker website and create yourself an account. While you're creating your account, you'll come to this screen where you can create a new game. Just wait here while I show the people who already have an account what to do. If you already have an account like I do, just click on your profile at the bottom here, press games and then add new game. Now we should be on the same screen. Select setup new game and then give your game a name. Then choose your genre, I'm just going to select other. Then what engine you're developing in, I'm going to do Unity. And then what phase of development you're currently in. Then press next. Now you need to select your platforms here, and it's important that you select something because we're going to have to select the same thing inside of Unity. For my case, I'm just going to select iOS and Android. Now you can always add more platforms later. Press create. The next step is to go to this GitHub link, which I'll leave down below, press code and then download zip. Once you have downloaded your zip file, you want to extract it. Now I'll use WinRAR to do this, but you can use whatever you want. Step 3, go into Unity, press Windows, Package Manager. Inside of this, press this little plus button and add package from disk. Locate your downloaded folder, go inside of it and select this package file. Press open. Once it's imported everything in, it should appear here under Custom and then LootLocker. Now go back to the LootLocker website and log in, go to Settings, Game Settings, and then go into API and copy this game API key. Back inside of Unity, we're going to go to Edit and then Project Settings. Then inside of Project Settings, you want to go to LootLocker SDK and the API key, you want to paste that in. Your game version can be whatever game version you are on, I'm just going to leave it as it is, and your platform has to be the same platform you selected earlier. Because I selected Android and iOS, I'm just going to keep it on Android. Keep development mode on if you're developing the game, and current debug level to all, and allow token refresh. Okay, so now that everything is set up, it means we can start making the leveling system. The first step will be creating a player. Inside of LootLocker, you have this players section, and this will display every player that plays your game. And, well, essentially, we need to create a player to allow them to have an inventory system as well as experience. Now, we can do this for Unity in many different ways, and the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to have an input field and a button that allows you to create your player. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created myself a canvas as well as an input box and a button to create our player. Now, as I said, I'm going to enter a name and then that's going to create our player, so let's go into our hierarchy, press create empty, and let's call this game manager. Then let's add component and also type in game manager, and press new script, create and add. Now, inside of the script, we're going to add a couple using methods, the first one being unityengine.ui. And the second one being using lootlocker.requests. Let's make a public input field and call this player name input field. Let's also create a public game object, which will be our create player button. Next up, we're going to create ourselves a current device ID. So at the top, we're going to add another user method. This time it's just going to be system. And we're just going to type GUID, and this will be our current device ID. Now let's make a public function called createPlayer. Now inside of this function, let's grab our current device ID and make that equal GUID.newGUID. Essentially, this is going to create us a really long number, essentially being our ID. Next up, we're going to save this current device ID, and the reason we're doing this is because we don't always want to create a new player. Sometimes we want to enter a player that we have already created. So type in player prefs and then set string, inside of which we're going to just call this GUID, then we're going to do a comma, and we're going to grab current device ID, and then dot toString brackets like such. Now let's actually go ahead and create our player. So let's grab LootLocker SDK Manager, dot start session, inside of which we'll grab our current device ID, and once again we're going to set it to our string. Then let's do a comma, some brackets, inside of which I'm going to write response. Then I'm going to do an equals larger than sign. I'm going to remove this last bracket and add some curly brackets. On this last kind of curly bracket, add yourself a normal bracket and then a semicolon. Inside of here, we're going to check if our response was successful by typing if response.success, and then we're going to have an else statement. Now, if it wasn't successful, let's go ahead and do a little debug.log, which is just going to say failed, for instance, and let's also grab the response.error so we know what exactly is going on. Inside of here, we're also going to do a debug.log, but this one's just going to say success. Now we want to go ahead and give our player a name, so type in LootLocker SDK Manager dot set player name, inside of which we are going to grab our input field, which is the player name input field, dot text, and then you're going to set null for the second option. Back in Unity, we're going to go to the game manager and we're going to assign our player name as well as our create player button. On the button, we're also going to scroll down to on click, press this plus button and drag in our game manager, select game manager and then create player. Let's press play and check if it works. So let's type in a name, for instance Gabby, press create player and it should come out with success. If we go back to this LootLocker player section, you can refresh this and you should now see your player. We have this random GUID, we also have our player name, and we can press view to look at our experience points and other things like our inventory, storage, orders and whatnot. Right now there is nothing here, so let's actually start doing something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this button and I'm going to make this one the login button. Back in Unity, let's make a new function that will allow us to log in with an existing account. So let's make a new function called public void login, and inside of which we're once again going to grab the LootLocker SDK manager start session. However, inside of this we're going to grab player prefs dot get string, because remember we saved the string. It was called GUID, and then we're going to do a comma and just some normal brackets like so. Let's do another comma, some brackets, response, and then equals larger than, and then let's do some brackets like so, and finally a bracket and semicolon at the end just like we did prior. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this from here because I don't want to type it up again. This time, we're going to remove the set player name as that is not useful. We just want something simple like so. Now, I'm logging in using a player prefs thing, but you could quite easily make a list of all the players available and have the player choose what player they want to log in as. Back inside of Unity, grab your login button, press this plus function, and then drag in your game manager like last time. Select game manager and log in. Now when we press play, you should be able to just press login, and I will log in as the exact same account, which right now doesn't show us anything. The next step is to allow us to give experience to our player. So I'm going to duplicate this login button and I'm going to call this give XP button. Then we're going to go back into our game manager and we're going to do some coding. So for my case, I'm going to do another input field, which will be the XP increase input field, because I want the player to decide how much XP they want to give themselves. Next up, I'm going to make another public function. This one's going to be called give XP, inside of which we're going to make a reference to the LootLocker SDK manager, and then we're going to do submit XP. Then in here, we need to actually pass a value. So for our case, we're going to grab this XP input field, and we're going to type int.pass, and in the brackets, we're going to type our input field, and we're going to do .text. Another bracket, then comma, another set of brackets, response like last, then equal and larger than, and let's do some brackets, finally having a bracket and a semicolon at the end. And just like last time, we're just gonna copy this over from the login function or the create player, whichever one will do. And now our function is finished, so let's go back into Unity. Let's grab the XP button and change the game manager to give XP. Let's press play. I would have almost forgotten we actually still need an input field, so let's duplicate the one that we already have. And let's make sure to go to the game manager and drag that in. Let's press play. Okay, so if you try and test this now, you will probably get an error. So to fix this, we need to go to LootLocker, go into settings, then MISC, and make sure player progression is enabled. Also, go to systems, levels, and you need to add some levels here. So I've gone ahead and added level 0, and the first one always has to be level 0. Then I've added level 1, which will be 100, and let's just add level 2, which I'm going to make 200 XP for the threshold. And now we can go back into Unity and press play. Then if we just log in and enter a value like 25, press give XP. It should say success. If it doesn't, make sure you follow the steps that I showed you and make sure the code is exactly the same. And now if we go back to LootLocker and we press view on my character, you should see we have 25 experience points, meaning that it's linking with LootLocker perfectly. For the next step, I'm going to show you how to display the current level of the player, the next level, and how much XP they are on and how much they need to move on to the next level. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created a slider to display this, and you can do this by right-clicking the canvas, press UI, and then select slider. Inside of this, I've added 2 empty game objects, one called current level, and I've just given it an image, and then next level. Inside of this, I have 2 texts. I also added a current XP, which is once again a text field, and important on the slider, make sure that it's not interactable, and go ahead and set your max value to something like 100 for now, and then the value to 0. Let's go back into our game manager, and at the top we're going to make a public slider, and we are going to call this level slider. We also want to make some text fields, so do a public text, and I'm going to call this current level text, next level text, and also current XP text. So now let's actually make a function so we can see our experience. So we're going to call this public void check level. First of all, we want to grab the LootLocker SDK manager and then get player info. Inside of this, we are just going to make some brackets, type in response. And once again, we're just going to do the equal larger than some curly brackets, and then a bracket and a semicolon to finish it off. And inside of here, we want to do a couple of things. The first things first is we want to see if we have leveled up. As you may remember, in LootLocker on our levels, we have this XP threshold. So first of all, let's check if we've met this threshold. To do this, I'm just going to check if our level slider dot value is equal to the level slider dot max value. So if we've met the threshold, let's get our level slider. Let's set our max value to equal response dot level thresholds dot next, means the next threshold. And we're going to take away the response.xp, and you do have to do the float thing because this is originally an integer. And then we are going to do int pass, and we're going to grab our XP increased field.text. Then we want to set our level slider value to equal 0 because we're restarting the new level. But if we haven't reached this yet, let's make sure our level slider.value is equal to float our response.xp, which is our current XP. Take away our response.level threshold, this time our current one that we are on. Now the final few things we have to do is just update our text. So let's grab our current level text.text, and let's make this equal our response.level, aka the level we're currently on, and let's set it to a string. Let's also grab our next level text.text. Let's do some brackets, then do response.level, aka the current level we're on, +1, and then once again to string. Finally, we're going to grab our current XP.text, and I'm going to make this equal response.xp.toString, but I'm also going to add kind of bracket sort of thing in between, and then plus response.level threshold.next. Once again, toString. This is going to display how much XP we have and how much we need to level up. What we also want to do is when we create our player, we want to call this function. So let's call check level. And let's copy that over and do the same thing for when we log in. And there's a couple things we want to do. First things first, let's open up a slider and let's fill all of this stuff in. Our level slider, then we want our current level text, our next level text, and our current XP text. I would have almost forgotten. Let's go back into the script and give XP, and let's also call this check level because we want it to update every time we give ourselves some experience. Let's log in. And we can see we have 25 experience. We are on level 0, and the next level is 1, which means we need 100 XP. So the final thing I'm going to show you how to do is the inventory system and rewards for when you reach a level. So to do this, we're going to go back into LootLocker. So let's go ahead and go into settings, context, and let's create a new context. Now this is basically something that allows us to group our assets. For instance, for this tutorial, I'm going to be making some weapon assets. So I'm going to call this weapon. The friendly name can be left kind of as it is. Then you can select if it's detachable, the complexity, and all this other cool stuff. We're going to go to content, assets, and then we're going to add a new asset. I am just going to call this dagger. And then on the context, we can select weapon, which is what we just created, and press create. Inside of here, you can change things like prices, whether it's universal, purchasable, and whatnot. I'm going to leave it as it is, but the one thing I am going to do is keep the name as it is and give it a file. So if you go to files and storage, we can click this to add a file. Load that in, save this, and also let's activate it. The next thing you have to do is go to systems, levels, and then give yourself the reward. I'm just going to select it for level 2 and press save. Now in Unity, we can display our inventory in many different ways, but I'm going to do this via a scroll view. I then set up my scroll view to look like this, but once again, do it how you like it. Now this inventory is going to display all our items, and to do this, we're going to right click the content, and I'm going to create an empty object, and I'm going to call this item. Inside of here, I'm going to add myself an image, which will be my background, so I'm just going to make it slightly larger. I'm also going to add a text field, which will be my item name. Finally, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to add another image, and this will be my item icon. So to make this work, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, let's go into our prefab, the item that we just created, and let's give it this item data script. So press new script, create an add. Now this script is going to be super simple. First of all, we're once again going to add the using function of unity.ui. We're going to remove the update function, but we can keep the start one. And we want to make a couple values. First of all, we want to make a public text, which will be our item name. We also want to make a public string, which will be our item name string. And finally, we want to make a public image, which will be our item icon. We're going to grab the item name and we're going to do .text, and we're going to make it equal the item name string. We're also going to grab our image and we're going to do .sprite. And we're going to make that equal itself, essentially. Back into our game manager script, let's create ourselves a new function. Now this function is going to be slightly longer, but we're going to call it public void player inventory. Inside of here, there's a couple things we want to do. First of all, let's grab the LootLocker SDK manager and do get inventory. Inside of which, we're going to do another pair of brackets and we're going to write response. And inside of this, we're going to copy this kind of success thing that we have in the givexp. Obviously, we're going to remove that a second. Now, inside of here, there's a couple things we need to do. The first things first is we need to reference our scroll view. And the way we're going to reference this is via a public transform. And we're just going to call this inventory list. We're also going to make a game object, which will be that item prefab. Inside of this, we first of all want to clear our scroll view. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to make a for each loop. Inside of which I'm going to do transform child in our inventory list. Let's do some brackets and let's make sure we do destroy child.gameObject. This is because whenever we add an item, we don't want to have duplicates of that item essentially. So we need to clear the list before we add anything to it. Now let's go ahead and make ourselves a LootLocker inventory. And we're going to make this an array and we're going to call it items. And I'm going to make a reference to response.inventory like so. Now we need to add the items from the LootLocker inventory into the scroll view. So let's make a for loop for int I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than items.length I++. So inside of here we want to do a couple things. First of all, we want to instantiate that item prefab. But I want to keep a reference to it, so I'm going to make a game object called child object. And I'm going to make that equal instantiate, then item prefab. And then we want to create it exactly in the same place as our inventory list. Then we want to make this object a child, so do child object.transform.parent and make sure to make it equal the inventory list. Next up, we want to set the name of this object, so let's do child object.get component, and then that script we added to it, item data dot name string thing that we created, and we're going to make it equal items, which is the array we created, i.asset.name.toString. We also want to set the actual name of the game object inside of Unity, so do child object.name, and I'm going to make it equal once again essentially this, so let's just copy this over. And that is the script finished, but we have to actually call this kind of script. So the way we're going to call it is go to givexp and we're going to call player inventory. We also want to call it every time we log in or create a player. Just like we did with the check level, we're going to check the player's inventory. Okay, so before we can test this out, I would have almost forgotten, go to your game manager and make sure your inventory list is actually the content and not the inventory item itself. And for the item prefab, make sure you drag the actual prefab item inside of your assets. Before we can actually test it out, make sure to go to your item and in the script, give yourself the item name and the item icon. So I've gone ahead and logged in and I've just reset my level to level 0 for a second. Let's give ourselves some XP and once again, and as you can see, we now have a dagger and it appears inside of here and it has the right name. And if we go back into LootLocker, press view, you can see we have the dagger inside of the inventory on LootLocker. Okay, so the final thing is to actually get the icons for our image. Now the way we're going to do it is we're going to directly download it from LootLocker. So as you may remember in content assets, if you go into your asset, you can go to files and storage and apply a file inside of here. And we're essentially going to grab this file from this website and into Unity. So this is actually super simple and only requires one function. So back inside of Unity, we're going to add a new using term. This is going to be using unityengine.networking. Let's scroll down and we're going to make a private enumerator, which is essentially a quarantine. And we're going to call this load texture. Inside of which we're going to make a string to the image URL. And we're also going to make an image and call it icon image, for instance. Then we're going to do the Unity web request, and we're just going to call it www, and we're going to make it equal Unity web request texture dot get texture, and then we're going to have the image URL. Then we're going to do a yield return www dot send web request, because we want to kind of send this request to the website. And then we're going to make a new reference to a texture 2D called loaded texture. And we're going to do this function called download handler texture. And then get content, and then www. The final thing we're going to do is set the icon on the item image. So do icon image dot sprite, and we're going to make this equal sprite dot create, and then the loaded texture. Finally, we're going to do a new rect, inside of which I'm going to do 0f, 0f, and then loaded texture dot width, loaded texture dot height, and then comma, vector2.0. We're basically getting the image URL, we're going to the website, we're downloading it, and we're setting a texture 2D called loaded texture with that image, and then we're setting the icon image to the sprite. The final thing to do is actually, well, call this function. So go into player inventory, and there is just 2 lines of code we have to do. First of all, let's make a reference to LootLocker file, and we're going to call this asset file, and we're going to make it equal items, and then brackets i.asset.files. And then finally, we're going to call this coroutine. So start coroutine, and then the name of it, which in our case is called load texture, some brackets, and instead of the brackets, we want to grab the asset file, and then just select 0, url.toString, comma, the icon image, which will be child object.getComponent, which will be the item data, dot icon image. And that should now get our texture from the website. So let's minimize this, and let's see if it has worked. So first of all, to make sure that you don't actually get any errors, make sure your item actually does have a file, like we added earlier. So back inside of this Unity project, I'm just going to create another profile just for instance. You can log in if you want though. And then let's give ourselves a value, for instance 200 to reach that XP level. And as you can see, we have added our dagger and it has the icon like so. So that is it for this tutorial. If you guys want more tutorials like this, then please leave a like and subscribe. Also remember, you don't have to utilize everything that I've showed you here, but it's just certain functions that you can use for your project in whatever way you want. So I'll see you guys later. Bye!